feed gas, developed during World War II, was slightly modified to make insecticides. DDT was the hero of its generation. New technologies promised higher yields, increased food production, cheaper prices, and greater availability. By the mid-20th century, these technologies, along with new developments in plant breeding, led to the Green Revolution. 97% of the varieties of vegetables grown at the beginning of the 20th century are now extinct. Genetic uniformity leads to an increased vulnerability to insects and disease. Farmers found themselves trapped on a pesticide treadmill. The more they sprayed, the more they had to spray. The increased use of fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides increased costs, polluted water, and created health risks. Then in the 1970s, Monsanto introduced Roundup. Because of its ability to kill most weeds, it became one of the most popular herbicides in history. In the mid-1990s, building on technologies that use gene splicing, the Green Revolution turned into the Gene Revolution. Capitalizing on the new technology, Monsanto genetically modified its seeds to be Roundup ready. Normally, Roundup kills anything green, but if the plant is Roundup ready, when it is sprayed, it doesn't die. Monsanto's Bt corn, the corn itself is registered as an insecticide. This is because every cell has been engineered to manufacture Bt, a natural bacterial toxin. If a corn borer eats any part of the plant, it will die. All species have developed elaborate mechanisms over millions of years to protect their cells from invasion from foreign DNA. Genetic engineers have to overcome the integrity of the species barrier to insert a new genetic trait into a plant or animal. When scientists began genetic engineering 30 years ago, they believed that one gene expressed one trait, that transgenic DNA would be stable even when forced to cross species barriers.
A new technique of molecular biology appears to have allowed us to outdo the standard events of evolution.
It is not known what sort of risk this is going to create because we have no tests.
The conference delegates voted against the moratorium, but did pledge to keep all recombinant DNA and genetically engineered organisms contained safely within laboratories. Currently, both agriculture and medical biotechnology use genetic engineering. Medical biotechnology has created many life-saving products. These pharmaceuticals are made under controlled conditions in secure labs. Genetically modified plants, unlike drugs, reproduce, and once released into the environment, cannot be controlled.
Using biotechnology to produce food is not new. For nearly 6,000 years, people have used yeast, a living organism, to make bread rise, and we've used biotech for almost as long to ferment beer and wine.
So there's really nothing new here. But that is completely wrong. Genetic engineering is really a radical revolution in food production. It's really a cell invasion technology. You know, people have heard they're taking a flounder gene and putting it in tomato so the tomato can last and cold temperatures. But people ask, how does that flounder gene get in that tomato? How does it get in there? And what really happens is, the only way you can do it is to invade the cell of the tomato and deposit the flounder gene. Well, what's good at invading cells? Bacteria and viruses.
After 12 years of searching, Monsanto found a soil bacteria that is naturally immune to Roundup herbicide. Their goal was to genetically engineer DNA from these bacteria into various plants. Some of the E. coli DNA recombines with the Roundup-resistant bacteria. Then the technicians smuggle the engineered DNA into the cells of the corn plant they want to modify. Cells will naturally reject foreign DNA, so they developed a method using soil bacteria that causes tumors in plants. They use this bacteria to ferry the engineered DNA into the plant's nucleus. There are also two other methods used to get the engineered DNA through the cell wall. One uses a stream of electricity to create tiny holes in the plant cells so they become vulnerable to infiltration by foreign DNA. Another is the gene gun, which blasts particles of gold coated with engineered DNA into the plant cells. Each of these three methods needs a promoter gene that turns on the desired characteristics. The promoter gene is often extracted from the cauliflower mosaic virus.
This capacity of bacteria and viruses to invade mammals in different ways is what really has a lot of people edgy about biotechnology, because that's really what the tools are all about. In order to move genetic material from one organism to another that don't normally cross, you've got to sort of behave like bacteria and viruses and invade into the cells and become established, just like the virus must become established.
And they do one more thing. They attach to that an antibiotic marker system.
The antibiotic marker is a gene which is naturally resistant to a specific antibiotic, so later they can test whether the genetic cassette is being expressed.
The most cataclysmic force in the food system right now is the fact that the medical community is just terrified about the loss of antibiotics. No one really understands how using antibiotic marker genes in genetic engineering techniques might contribute to the problem. The biomedical community on a worldwide basis is absolutely focused on this problem now.
Transgenic manipulations, we'll start seeing pieces of DNA interacting with each other in ways that are totally unpredictable.
We have now learned that genes function in complex networks, and a single gene can express or influence many traits.
I think this is probably the largest biological experiment humanity has ever entered into.
What Fox Television told us was that we were just the people to be the investigators.
Do any stories you want, ask tough questions, and get answers. So we thought, this is great, this is a dream job, fantastic. The very first thing they had us do was not to research stories, but to shoot this promo, which was The Investigators.
Uncovering the truth, getting results, protecting you.
And they had a film crew and a smoke machine, and we were silhouetted.
Investigative reporter Steve.
One of the first stories that Jane came up with was the revelation that most of the milk in the state of Florida and throughout much of the country was adulterated with the effects of bovine growth hormone, the artificial hormone that farmers were injecting into their cows so that they would produce more milk.
With Monsanto, I didn't realize how effectively a corporation could work to get something on the marketplace. The levels of coordination they had to have. They had to get university professors into the fold. They had to get experts into the fold. They had to get reporters into the fold. They had to get the public into the fold. And of course the FDA, let's not leave them out. They had to get the federal regulators convinced that this was a fine and safe product to get it onto the marketplace. And they did that. They did that very, very well.
It's a great time to be a high-producing cow. Posilac One Step, bovine somatotropin by Monsanto.
The federal government basically rubber-stamped it before they put it on the marketplace. The longest test they did for human toxicity was 90 days on 30 rats.
Posilac is the single most tested new product in history and is now available to you specifically so you can increase your profit potential.
And then either Monsanto misreported the results to the FDA, or the FDA didn't bother to look in depth at Monsanto's own studies.
The scientists within Health Canada looked very carefully at bovine growth hormone and came to very different conclusions than the Food and Drug Administration in the U.S. did.
Monsanto's engineered growth hormone did not comply with safety requirements. It could be absorbed by the body and therefore did have implications for human health. Mysteriously, that conclusion was deleted from the final published version of their report.
They knew there were problems. They saw serious potential human health problems, and they stood up in Canada and said, we're not going to approve this because we don't believe it's safe.
We have been pressured and coerced to pass drugs of questionable safety, including the RBST. I personally was very concerned that there's a very serious problem of secrecy, conspiracy, and things of that nature, and something needs to be done.
The FDA was then on the hot seat. They had to come up with an answer. They didn't come up with a good one. And they never took the opportunity then. I mean, what would they do? Pull it off the market and say, we need to now do the job that we didn't do the first time? They didn't do that.
We wrote the story. We had it ready a week beforehand. They bought ads.
Farmers in the milk industry say it's safe, but studies suggest a link to cancer. Don't miss this special report from the investigators.
That Friday night before the Monday this series was to begin, the fax machine spit out a letter from this very high-priced lawyer in New York that Monsanto had hired. It contained a lot of things that were just off-the-wall false, just demonstrably false. But if you didn't know the story and you didn't know how we had gone about producing it, would have scared you as a broadcaster, as a manager.
And they decided that they would pull the story and they would just check it one more time.
But the bottom line was that there was no factual errors in that story. Both sides had been heard from. Both sides had had an opportunity to speak.
1 week later, Monsanto sent the second letter. And this was even more strongly worded. And it said there will be dire consequences for Fox News if the story airs in Florida. And this time they freaked. They were afraid of being sued, and they were also afraid of losing advertising dollars at all of the stations owned by Rupert Murdoch. And he owned more television stations than any other group in America. And that's 22 television stations. That's a lot of advertising dollars for Roundup, aspartame, NutraSweet, and other products.
So we got into a battle, and the first deal was the new general manager.
And his name's Dave. And Dave is a salesman, and, you know, he'd pump your hand. How you doing? How you doing?
Called us upstairs to his office, and he said, what would you say if I killed this piece? What if it never ran? And we said, well, you know, we wouldn't be very happy about that. And he said, well, I could kill it, you know. And we said, yes, of course, you're the manager. You could kill it. It would never air. And he's hemming and he's hawing and he's back and he's forth. And we couldn't figure out, what is this all about? And finally he blurted out, look, would you tell anybody? You know, I said, I'm not going to lie for you. About a week later, calls us back to the office and says, okay, we'd like you to make these changes. In fact, you will make these changes. We said, well, look, let us show you the research that we have that shows that this information you want us to broadcast isn't true. To which he replies, I don't care about that. I said, pardon me? And he said, that's what I have lawyers for. Just write it the way the lawyers want it written. I said, you know, this is news. This is important. This is stuff people need to know. And I'll never forget, he didn't pause a beat, and he said, we just paid $3 billion for these television stations. We'll tell you what the news is. The news is what we say it is. I said, I'm not doing that. And he said, well, he said, if you refuse to present this story the way we think it should be presented, you'll be fired for insubordination. I said, I will go to the Federal Communications Commission and I will report that I was fired from my job by you, the licensee of these public airwaves, because I refused to lie to people on the air. And it's thank you very much. You'll hear from us right away. Well, 24 hours came and went and we didn't hear a thing. And about a week later, he calls us back, and now we've changed strategies. How about if we pay you some money and you just go away? And I said, how much money? Because, you know, when somebody offers to bribe you like that, I always want to know if it might be worth it.
He was going to offer us the rest of our year's salary if we agreed not to talk about what Monsanto had done, to not talk about the Fox corporate response in suppressing the story, and to not talk about the story. Not talk about BGH, again, anywhere. Not take the story to another news organization. Zip up.
I said, you mean if I want to go to my daughter's PTA meetings and explain what's in the school milk at the school lunch program? I can't. No, you can never speak about this anywhere.
And Steve says, okay, write it up. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Write it up. And I didn't say anything. And Dave, he wrote it up. And he FedExed it to us a couple days later. And he said, are you going to sign? And we said, nah, Dave, we're not going to sign that. And he said, well, send it back, okay? I said, no, Dave, we're not going to send that back.
It was, okay, we can't buy you out. We can't shut you up. Let's get the story on the air in a way that we can all agree it will go on the air. And we started rewriting and editing with their lawyers.
Well, during this 8-month re-review process, I say jokingly, they did things like, for example, they wanted to take out the word cancer. You don't have to identify what the potential problem is, but just say human health implications. Any criticism of Monsanto or its product, they either removed it or minimized it. And it was very, very clear, I would say, almost every edit they made to the piece, that was the aim.
And we changed this and this and this, and then that wasn't good enough. Okay, now change this and this and this. Now change this and this. Version after version after version, 83 times.
83 times is unheard of. It doesn't happen. You shouldn't have to rewrite something 83 times. Obviously, they didn't want to put the thing on the air, and they were trying to drive us crazy and get us to quit or wait until the first window in our contract so that they could fire us.
They, in effect, announced that they were going to fire us for no cause. Well, this was a little much.
And Steve wrote a letter to the lawyer in Atlanta, whose name is Carolyn Forrest, the Fox corporate lawyer.
And I said, you know, this isn't about being fired for no cause. You're firing us because we refused to put on the air something that we knew and demonstrated to be false and misleading. That's what this is about. And because we put up a fight, because we stood up to this big corporation, and we stood up to your editors, and we stood up to your lawyers, and we said to you, look, there ought to be a principle higher than just making money.
And she wrote a letter back and said, you are right. That's exactly what it was. You stood up to us on this story, and that's why we're letting you go.
Jane sued Fox under Florida's whistleblower statute, which protects those who try to prevent others from breaking the law. But her appeal court judges found that falsifying news isn't actually against the law.
Florida's appellate court has ruled in favor of Fox 13. You may recall that Jane Acree, a former reporter here, sued Fox 13 in a whistleblower lawsuit, claiming she was fired for refusing to distort her report. The appeals court today threw that case out, saying Ms. Acree had no whistleblower claim against the station based on news distortion. Fox 13 Vice President and General Manager Bob Linger says the station has been completely vindicated by the ruling.
Well, it was supposed to be a temporary budget bill that would curb threats of a government shutdown and fund the country for the next 6 months. President Obama signed House Resolution 933 into law on Tuesday, but hidden within the text of this budget bill is a section critics are calling the Monsanto Protection Act. This section actually protects the biotech industry from being sued. The farmer's assurance provision takes away the federal court's right to halt the sale and use of genetically modified seed crops regardless of public health concerns. Now, food safety groups are crying foul. They say that this provision is a major violation of the separation of powers in the U.S. To discuss this issue in greater detail, Jeffrey M. Smith joins me now. He's the author of the book, Seeds of Deception. Hey there, Jeffrey. Can you start by breaking this provision down a little bit more for us? Who specifically does it affect?
Well, it affects the biotech industry. They're trying to introduce new genetically modified crops. Typically, they break the laws in order to get these crops on the market without doing proper environmental impact statements. And this is why they had to stop the introduction of Roundup-ready alfalfa in the past, and they had to face lawsuits and court statements that was telling them to stop the introduction of sugar beets.
Now,
however,
go ahead.
With this provision, even if the court tells the USDA you have introduced a genetically modified crop illegally and you must stop and introduce a proper evaluation of the environmental impact, this measure tells the USDA that they are mandatory, that they're required to go ahead and allow farmers to plant it and wave their fingers, so to speak, at the courts. So it actually dismembers the normal balances of power and checks and balances between the courts and the executive branch.
Now, from what I understand, Jeffrey, this provision will only last as long as this bill does, so just about a year or so. So what harm could 1 year really do, considering the fact that Monsanto and other biotech giants win the majority of their court cases? How will it affect us legally and environmentally?
Well, actually, they continue to lose to the Center for Food Safety because they continue to introduce these products without proper environmental impact statements. And so they recently passed a policy that allowed companies like Monsanto to do their own environmental impact statements. So now we have a situation where the fox is guarding the hen house and then also managing all the key positions. But it could be that we'll have some very serious crops introduced during this 6-month window. It's supposedly for the 6-month funding bill, but it's doubtful that they're actually going to get a replacement bill in time in 6 months. So they may just extend the provisions of this bill, which can make it last about a year, as you mentioned. So a lot of damage can be done during that time. Right now, Monsanto's trying to get crops on the market that can withstand doses of 2,4-D herbicide, which is a component of Agent Orange. There's other things in the pipeline, and any of these things could create major environmental catastrophes. But once it's released into the environment, there's no full recall that you can do because the genes self-propagate through pollen, and it becomes a self-propagating genetic pollution that can outlast the effects of global warming and nuclear waste.
So potentially huge consequences. Now, one of the major proponents for this bill was actually Senator Roy Blunt. The New York Daily News actually reported that this Missouri senator actually worked with Monsanto to craft Section 735, which is the Monsanto Protection Act. Here's a few other seedy things that I was able to dig up about him. First of all, he's a ranking member of appropriations subcommittees on agriculture, rural development, and also the Food and Drug Administration. He also received $64,250 from Monsanto for his campaign committee between 2008 and 2011. That's according to the Center for Responsive Politics, and that actually makes him the largest party recipient of Monsanto funding as of late. So what should we make of all of this, since he is the one that actually put this part into the bill?
This is perfectly typical of the kind of things that Monsanto does. They and the biotech industry and agricultural industrial giants have spent tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, in fact, lobbying Washington and paying for campaign contributions, etc. And I think we all know that the person in charge of policy at the FDA back in 1992, when the GMO policy was created, was Monsanto's former attorney and later Monsanto's vice president, and now the U.S. food safety czar back at the FDA. Even the USDA Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, won the biotech governor of the year when he was the Iowa governor and gave Monsanto an award in year 2000. So we have a situation where there's key people in the Obama administration who are basically Monsanto men or have been receiving financial support. So this is why we're in favor of a market campaign to stop GMOs, where people avoid GMOs because they're actually dangerous for health, and then we'll see the companies eliminate them, even if the government is still marching lockstep with the biotech industry.
So obviously they're very influential when it comes to both the biotech industry as well as possibly lawmakers, as you're saying. Now, some Democrats are simply claiming that they didn't know anything about this particular part of the bill. The entire bill, which was H.R. 933, was about 78 pages long. I read the section 735 myself, and I found the text to be rather cryptic, but I'm not paid to vote for these things. Is this an assertion that the Democrats simply didn't know about the Monsanto Protection Act a valid excuse, or does it highlight perhaps a bigger problem about our legislators?
I think yes and no. This did not go through the normal committees for the Judicial Committee or the Agricultural Committee, and it should have, because it really eviscerates the checks and balances of the government and is probably unconstitutional. In fact, even Secretary Vilsack's office mentioned in a response to the press that he's going to check with the judicial branch because it may be unconstitutional. This was done in the Appropriations Committee kind of as an end around. So that shows that the entire mechanism of government has been hijacked. And it explains why some of the senators and congressmen didn't necessarily know it at the time, because it didn't go through normal channels. However, tens of thousands of people have contacted their senators and congressmen, and over 100,000 people called the White House demanding that President Obama veto this particular section. He ignored the callers. The senators and congressmen ignored the callers as a whole, and we end up with this extremely unconstitutional passage, which could really result in significant damage to the environment, as well as damage to our Constitution.
Something we're definitely going to have to follow up on. Jeffrey Smith, author of Seeds of Deception, thank you for your opinions.
You're welcome.
The corporations own this country. I mean, what?
The truth.
Yes.
Look, you guys.
Yeah, okay, but we talked about.
You guys work for big corporations. You are corporations, so I take that to be the truth.
Okay,
Yeah,
we
corporations don't.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little different. I mean, the corporations we work for are a little different than Monsanto. Okay, we were talking last week about some of the stuff that is subsidized in America agriculturally, and it's all the stuff that goes into making the worst kinds of food. It's not beets and broccoli. It's
no,
only
there
sugar
should be
and
no
salt.
subsidy. There should be no subsidies for any food.
Okay, but after the show, a lot of people said to me that's current. Why don't you talk about genetically modified foods? Okay, you're right. We should talk about genetically modified foods. And again, this is a conspiracy of both parties. Obama said in 2007 we would label genetically modified foods, which, by the way, Europe has this. China labels. China, which puts
that
lead...
bastion of freedom.
And puts lead in baby food, or some shit like that.
At least you know it's there.
Okay, but we can't have that in America. You know why? Because in America, corporations run the show. Even though 9 out of 10 Americans would like foods to at least be labeled, at least we know they're Frankenfoods.
Why?
Okay, they can't. Why? Because it says it would hurt sales.
No.
So shut up and eat your fucking mutant chili. That's why. Because
if it's useful to label food, so for instance, things like fair trade coffee, if you go to Kroger, which is, if not the biggest, one of the very biggest supermarket chains in America, they use a system where you can track your produce. You can use a QR scan on your smartphone, and things like that.
Oh, for God's sake, who's going to do that? Can we just put it on the label like everybody else in the world?
What I'm saying is that the market has, when consumers want that information, it's provided to them. Why? I don't care about genetically modified organisms,
no, that's the point.
Which have never been shown to hurt anybody.
But you have a public role here, which is to warn people. It's not a question just
what
consumers
are you warning them of?
Of whatever it is involved in what's in the food. If it's genetically modified.
Yeah, I'd like to know that.
I'd like to know
modified.
Listen,
wait a second. Wait a second. But here are the facts.
Whether it is and what it is.
In Europe, only 5% of the food is genetically modified. Here, it's 70%. And
what is the definition of genetically modified?
Well, here's something that didn't used to exist. They didn't used to take a gene out of a bacterium and put it in corn so that the corn grows its own insecticide.
Right.
That's right.
Now we
Which,
do that.
by the way, is good because then we use
I know,
less
it's awesome.
insecticide.
It's also delicious.
No, wait.
Hold on. No. There's a great argument
but
for it. But if I want to make a decision about whether or not to ingest that genetically modified organism, I don't want it to be kept secret from me. If the argument against it from the industry, if the argument against it from the industry is that I will hysterically, as a consumer, make a decision if I see that label not to buy that corn. Well, the solution to that is not then to make it a secret thing that I'm ingesting it, but rather to convince me that it's safe.
And just to show that we are not partisan, you know, the villain in this is Obama to me, because he first of all, he promised blatantly that he would look into this and do something, and he didn't. He also appointed, what is the guy's name? Michael Taylor. Used to be a VP at Monsanto, the seat of evil. To be the food czar, the FDA deputy commissioner of food. And of course, Monsanto's latest Frankenfood got speedy approval because this guy is in charge of it. Because it's like putting Jerry Sandusky in charge of Chuck E. Cheese. Of course he's going to approve with speediness.
Should anything, if there is not a health risk, and there are not health risks
but there
associated
may be a health
wait. There may be. There are not known health risks that are associated with GMOs. Why shouldn't the labeling be voluntary? And then if you choose,
voluntary.
I know, voluntary in America. You've got to be nuts.
Right. Let's trust the corporations to put people's health above profit, because that's what they would do.
That's not what I'm saying.
That's what corporations normally do.
All right, well, from the international stage to here in the U.S., here to discuss the issue of GMOs is Jeffrey Smith. Now, he's the author of the book, Seeds of Deception. Jeffrey, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Very briefly, some people say, well, these GMOs can help solve world starvation and yada, yada, yada. Why not allow these companies to push their seeds wherever they want?
First of all, the experts agree that GMOs have nothing to offer to feed the world, eradicate poverty, or establish sustainable agriculture. That was clear in a report done by over 400 scientists over several years, sponsored by several UN agencies. In fact, when GMOs were introduced in India 10 years ago, to much hype and celebration, now the government finally admits that it's responsible for widespread suicides, an estimated 250,000 suicides among farmers, and most of which have been blamed on BT Cotton's failure to yield and allow farmers to even pay back their high-interest loans.
So why aren't we seeing this kind of outreach here in the U.S.? I mean, I just want to bring up a fact. I mean, in Europe, there's almost no GM crops, while here in the U.S., nearly 75% of our food products are GE tainted. Why aren't Americans as outraged?
Until recently, most Americans had no idea what GMOs were. However, we're now seeing more and more awareness and agitation. And this has resulted in a natural demand for labeling so people can reject GMOs, since most Americans say that if GMOs were labeled, they would reject it. Right now, 55 U.S. congressmen have sent a letter to the FDA demanding labeling. Recently, 1 million signatures were handed into the FDA, but we're not going to wait for the federal government. It's now happening at state levels. In Connecticut,
why shouldn't we wait for the federal government?
Well, unfortunately, the Obama administration has been walking lockstep with Monsanto and basically has taken some pro-GM people from Monsanto and related organizations and put them into key positions like food safety czar, like USDA secretary, like USAID director. So basically, if we're dealing with the federal government, we're dealing with an arm of Monsanto.
It almost seems to me, and tell me if you think this is a far stretch, that you can describe Monsanto as a pseudo-drug pusher. I mean, if a company like McDonald's put, say, crack in its burgers, hooking consumers on their food, and just to throw in some fun, sued anyone that went to Burger King for alternative food sources, we would be up in arms. It just surprises me that there isn't as much widespread outrage on the Hill, for example, over this issue.
When people learn about Monsanto and why it was consistently voted every year as the world's most evil company, they get outraged. However, Monsanto spends billions of dollars in disinformation. In fact, last week, one of its lawyers threatened to sue the state of Vermont if the Vermont legislature passed a labeling law that would require people to label genetically engineered foods.
And do you see this changing in any way? I mean, I know you said you sound a little bit optimistic. People are sort of catching on, but I mean, let's be realistic. Money talks, lobbyists talk. U.S. opinion doesn't necessarily change policy.
Well, there's been labeling bills proposed in over 20 states this year, which is unprecedented. But I see real possibility happening in California, where in 2 weeks from now, they're going to hand in 850,000 signatures to force the measure to go on the ballot so it'll be voted directly by the citizens. And then we'll probably see Monsanto raining down a multi-million-dollar disinformation campaign trying to get people to vote against their best interests. But I think it will pass in California. And once companies have to label their products, I think they'll remove GMOs rather than admit that they use them.
Well, Jeffrey, I do want to thank you for your time. I know that if I was at the supermarket and was looking at a piece of beef and realized that it was made of some weird genetically modified Franken, God knows what products, I probably wouldn't choose to buy it. So it's no surprise that the lack of labeling is what is perhaps keeping some of us in the dark. But it certainly is an important issue and one that we will continue to talk about later in today's shows. That was Jeffrey Smith, the author of the book Seeds of Deception.
We are blocking the two entrance gates of Monsanto today by locking ourselves on. In this way we prevent that the gates can be opened and we prevent that the workers can go in. So we want to stop all work at the company for a whole day. So economically that brings them some harm. We plan to stay here until the working day is over. So they can't work for the whole day. You definitely don't need any special training. Okay. You just need motivation. So basically we are in this tube and we can't get out. That's how we block the gate. We're attached. They have to cut through it. This is quite thick, it's strong steel. I think they won't be able to do it with little saw. They will need some bigger machinery. They have these special de-locking teams, which is not bad because then at least you know that they know what they're doing. But I think it's outrageous that a company like Monsanto is destroying so many things in the world. And the company that was here was a Dutch seed industry called Ruiter Seeds and was taken over by Monsanto in 2008. And this clearly shows the character of a company like Monsanto. They're just like trying to buy up more and more seed companies. They're trying to monopolize the market more and more. Trying to have control basically over the whole food industry. Monsanto is clearly a company that really works on its image because they started off as a chemicals company. But then, of course, like any company, they're trying to make more profits or they're trying to find new markets. So that's when they started to get interested in the genetic engineering industry. So they started buying up little by little seed companies to be able to genetically manipulate plants, to take the patents on these plants, and actually find another product to sell their chemicals with. But then, of course, if you're not a chemical, well, supposedly not a chemical company anymore, it becomes a lot easier to give yourself a green image because you can say, you know, as an argument that is often given, we're actually feeding the world because with high production agriculture we can feed more people because we have higher rendements and stuff like that. But the opposite is true. I mean, there is enough scientific studies that show that there is not necessarily a higher rendement of these crops. And also an argument what they're often using is that on genetically manipulated plants they have to spray less pesticides. That's also not true because there is also a lot of proof that this is not the case.
I introduced myself, so I really like to know who you are and who you are. We already heard that you were European top and you are the Dutch representative. Why don't you say who you are?
Thierry Boyer.
Thierry Boyer.
Yes. Would you kill it?
Did you do that?
This is just, we improved this argument. You had some art here and we just adjusted this Monsanto art a bit more to the Monsanto manipulated reality. That's what we did here.
It's for a nice picture, come on, you know.
I'm fine with that. We didn't really destroy it. But
do you think this?
Another match, you will kill me? Kill me for you.
Well, that's minor damage compared to the damage Monsanto is doing to the world. So
he is right.
He is right.
Okay.
Would you give back life to those children who died in Paraguay from soya plantations from the Roundup? Would you? Why are you asking questions if you don't give the answers?
That's a heavy, real question.
Yeah. Would you give back the life to those children?
Maybe he doesn't know about it because he's from France. You are from the area.
He worked for Monsanto. He killed them.
It's true what he says. It's a serious question. It's terrible.
The main GM crop grown the day of today is genetically manipulated soy. It's mainly cultivated in South American countries. Monsanto owns it. It's called Roundup Ready Soy, and actually this soy is not food. It's not food for people because the majority of this crop is being used as fodder for the industrial livestock industry, mainly being exported as such from South American countries where it's grown to Europe and China, where meat markets are huge and intensive. It's quite absurd anyway that in countries where there is so much poverty, that land is actually being taken over for the production of fodder for European and Chinese meat and not for local food production. I think it's important that people realize what the situation is of food the day of today. That, you know, meat is not... meat is being produced at a scale that is not like, you know, some cows walking around on farms. There's actually a whole industry behind. There are companies like Monsanto behind that actually poison our agriculture. So people should stop eating meat because it's not only it's also good for against climate change in a way. So that's an extra reason. They should try to eat more local and in that way support local farmers, so they also are less dependent on large-scale companies, and try to eat more organic foods, so we don't need these pesticide companies anymore.
So another study was just conducted about the effects of genetically modified foods. It was done by a French research team, which for the last 7 years has been reevaluating biotech-funded government studies about GM corn. Last week, the group published their findings in a peer-reviewed journal called Food and Chemical Toxicology. The study was groundbreaking because it was the first time this specific GM maize was tested over 2 years, almost an entire rat's lifespan, instead of just the 90-day trial required by regulators. What they found is disturbing, to say the least. The rats developed high levels of cancer and abnormally giant tumors all over their bodies. So this just all further confirms what many other countries already seem to know. The safety of GMO crops is questionable. By no means should be sold as perfectly safe for human consumption without further testing. According to the Center for Food Safety, there are already 90 countries that aggressively monitor and restrict or ban GM imports. So why is there such a lack of GMO regulation in this country? Well, the biotech giant Monsanto, the largest producer of GM seeds in the world, has a very incestual relationship with the U.S. government, the roots of which stem back for decades. Bush Sr.'s administration was responsible for deeming GMO crops as substantially equivalent to non-GMO crops, opening the floodgate for the industry to take over the food supply with little room for opposition. But if anyone knows about Monsanto's toxic past as a chemical company, they know that the food giant's also responsible for such historical gems as DDT, PCBs, and Agent Orange. Monsanto didn't start genetically modifying plant cells and producing seeds until the mid-1980s. And it was all made possible by someone you may know today, a Mr. Mitt Romney. Yep, the Republican presidential hopeful was intimately involved in Monsanto's transition into biotechnology. When Romney was fresh out of Harvard, he joined the consulting firm Bain & Company, and Monsanto was Bain's largest client. Quickly, Romney and John W. Hanley, Monsanto's CEO at the time, became very tight. They were so close, in fact, that Hanley treated Romney like a son, giving him $1 million to jumpstart two side companies, Bain & Company and Bain Capital. Now, at the time, Monsanto was mired in scandal. So Romney and Bain were focusing how to shift Monsanto's business practices away from those that were gaining so much negative publicity. By 1981, as Bain was intimately guiding the company's direction, biotech was firmly established as Monsanto's strategic research focus. Conflict of interest much? Yep. It's a little piece of history that isn't boasted about much on the campaign trail. So where is Romney now? Unsurprisingly, he's still surrounding himself with his good old friends at Monsanto. During the presidential primaries, Romney named an 11-member agricultural advisory committee that was full of Monsanto connections. But all of this attention on Romney wouldn't be fair without going over Obama's love affair with the scandalous ag giant as well. When he was on the campaign trail, Obama said that he would listen to consumer needs and label GMOs. But it turns out that he might be one of the most GMO-friendly presidents to ever grace the Oval Office. Under his administration, Obama has opened the door for the following GM crops: Monsanto GMO alfalfa, Monsanto GMO sugar beets, Monsanto GMO BT soybean, Syngenta GMO corn for ethanol, Pioneer GMO soybeans, Syngenta GMO BT cotton, Bayer GMO cotton, and a GMO papaya strain. So, how did this happen? Well, one only has to look at who Obama has appointed to the very regulatory bodies that are supposed to be responsible for our food safety. Roger Beachy, the director at the USDA, is a former director of the Monsanto Danforth Center. Michael Taylor, the FDA's food safety czar, is the former vice president of Monsanto. Ramona Romero, a USDA counsel, was previously on DuPont's corporate counsel. And the Secretary of Agriculture, Thomas Vilsack, was awarded Governor of the Year by the Biotechnology Industry Organization, whose members include Monsanto. And lastly, Islam Siddiqui, the U.S. Agriculture Trade Representative who pushes GM exports in other countries, is a former Monsanto lobbyist. Now, you might be wondering why the revolving door between Monsanto and the U.S. government isn't more visible. Well, that's because the White House has refused to answer FOIA requests demanding the disclosure of the relationship with the company. Once again, Monsanto is completely ruthless and at the expense of our agriculture and even worse, our health. We can't wait around for the government to listen to us. So this is a call to action. Stand up to this corporation, stop eating their food, and let's make sure that they don't meet their bottom line.
Tell us why you're here, what you're doing here.
I'm here because Monsanto is straight up evil. They're the biggest chemical company in the world, practically, along with Dow, Bayer, BASF, Syngenta, and Pioneer. However, Monsanto is really the devil, realized in a corporation, if you will. And they're responsible for the majority of genetically modified organisms in the world. Here in Hawaii, we are the site of the
Getting some support.
Yes, we are, because they have been kicked out of 30 countries, and they're doing the majority of their experimental open-air field trials here in Paradise, in Hawaii.
So you're talking right here, right here there are poison,
This is all poison land. This is all poison land. You couldn't even grow real food on it if you wanted to at this point. You would actually have to cleanse the land of the GMOs for at least 4 or 5 years.
Well, there's a subdivision right across the street there.
I know. They're spraying all these pesticides on these people. They're engineering the food to require the heavy use of pesticides. They've been kicked out of 30 countries, dude. They're poisoning us. Get up! Get up! They're poisoning us, Papi Chulo! You know, you gotta like get people fired up.
You're good. Thank you so
They're
much.
poisoning us!
So tell us, there's something coming up on December 5th. What can people do to try and help?
December 5th, okay, if you want to keep on top of it, you should definitely tune into Babes Against Biotech. That's our nonprofit. We do GMO education and, you know, help get Monsanto the heck out of everywhere. It would be great. So on December 5th, we'll be at the Honolulu City Council. That's going to be let's see. Actually, at 9 a.m., we're going to be presenting honorary certificates to some GMO educators. So
oh, neat. Okay, that's at 9 a.m.
Yeah, we need people to come and say, okay, I can either stay for the morning, the afternoon, or the night. Because we need to be prepared for any kind of shady tricks they might pull.
Right,
like moving 12-319 on the agenda. Oh, we're going to put this out of line here and do it now when all your testifiers aren't here, etc. So we're going to be testifying for GMO labeling. Councilman Tom Berg will be introducing an FD1, 12-319 FD1, that means a floor draft, to restore GMO labeling statewide to the HSAC package. Now that's the Honolulu Statewide Association of Counties, and every year they put together a legislative package that's submitted to the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate, and they have to unanimously agree on any measure that's in that package in order to submit it. Well, every other county in Oahu, thank you Hawaii County and Kauai County and Maui County for being pono. Thank you, council members on every other island. Thank you. We really appreciate that you actually care about people. Here on Oahu, let's see, with Joey Manahan on the city council now, it's about over $30,000 that has been poured into the campaign funds of our council members by GMO companies and their registered lobbyists. So they decided to just slip out the mandatory GMO labeling out of the Honolulu package, like as in not even discuss it, not even vote on it. They slipped that out, and they slipped out the other thing that got unanimous support, which is the repeal of Act 55 to abolish the Public Land Development Corporation, PLDC, that's selling off public land. They're all in collusion together. It's probably not long until Monsanto owns some land here. And actually, Kamehameha schools evict Monsanto. What are you doing? This is supposed to be taking care of the Hawaiians. I'm not even Hawaiian, I'm offended. Okay? I'm adopted by Hawaiians, thank God in heaven almighty. I'm Cuban, so I'm pissed. I don't like being poisoned and treated like a lab rat against my consent. Now, if you're going to pay me to be a lab rat, you know, I still would say no. But at least give me that option and label GMOs. And ban them, as a matter of fact.
Now you're going to be there on December 5th, so if people want to talk to you, they can show up at Honolulu
Hale. They should show up at Honolulu Hale.
Who should come? Can you bring your kids and stuff like that?
Yes, please bring your children. Please bring your children, bring your grandmothers, bring everyone you know, bring your organic farmers, bring your doctors, bring all your organic associations and anyone who doesn't want to be poisoned or experimented on by chemical companies, who actually Monsanto, this company, was sued by their hometown, okay? Biggest lawsuit in the history of the United States. Right. They all got cancer. They contaminate land. They contaminate seed, they contaminate agriculture, they contaminate food, they contaminate groundwater, they kill bacteria in the soil, they engineer pesticides into the food, so you're actually eating pesticides. You can't wash it off. They can't wash it off. So December 5th, they should call Councilman Berg's office at 768-5001, 768-5001. To stay abreast, you should definitely go to Facebook.com/babesagainstbiotech, okay? Facebook.com/babesagainstbiotech, as in biotechnology. Right. This is what these fools are doing. They're engineering life. They think, oh, I'm going to go in a lab. I'm going to make this stuff so that if you want to grow food, you have to buy tons of chemicals, which is great because I sell the chemicals. So it's a closed loop. They've been kicked out of 30 countries. GMO labeling is required in 61 countries. But unfortunately, our FDA, our USDA, and our EPA are all littered with biotech executives that used to work for Monsanto. Michael Taylor used to work for Monsanto. Clarence Thomas, a Supreme Court justice, he was a Monsanto attorney. I mean, they're everywhere. Obama said, I'm going to label GMOs to get into office the first time. And he got into office and he appointed Michael Taylor and Bill Sack, our Secretary of Agriculture and Biotech Legislator of the Year. The good news is that Calvin Say has been ousted. Mahalo, universe. Unfortunately, Joe Suki is now in his place, who is paid by petrochemicals. So he's a big fan of plastic, but maybe the chemical plastic can beat the chemical GMO. Is that like rock, paper, scissors? You know, evil plastic beats evil genetic mutations. These guys are nuts. They really don't care. And by the way, Babes Against Biotech, we do our best to research and know we do not date GMO eaters. Ew.
That's important to know.
Yeah, I don't want to make out with someone who's been eating transgenic corn. Oh yeah. Let's totally do it with some BT pesticide all up in there. That sounds great. No, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it.
Thanks.
Have you had your experimental breakfast? Right here, we got an experiment for you. Be proud of your product and label it. Label your GMOs.
We could hold Michael Taylor, head of the FDA, responsible for that. He was a lawyer and a lobbyist for Monsanto at different points during his career. Now he heads up the FDA, and they're the ones who, with a stroke of the pen, they can make GMOs a very small part of the market by putting a label on them and making them a third tier. Really, they would be, be organic, conventional, and GMO, and people would know to avoid it, but at least they would have the option. Right now, we don't even have the option because we don't have the knowledge that it's actually GMOs inside the box.
Genetically modified seed has become a major problem for organic farmers in this country. It's practically impossible to get organic corn seed or even unmodified corn seed anymore. All the seed is modified by Monsanto and some of the other companies to have this herbicide-resistant trait, which is illegal to use in organic farming. So you can't use that trait. And a lot of organic farmers have just dropped out of growing corn altogether because you can't get the seed. And the problem is that corn seed, the pollen from corn, is viable for about 6 hours, and during that period of time it can travel miles on wind or trucks or something, bees, and it can contaminate fields that are miles away. And so you really don't have any chance if you're growing corn at the same time somebody else is growing GMO corn to raise an organic crop.
We're concerned about genetically modified organisms. This is a biotech convention here at the Boston Convention Center, and we're here to protest the development of genetically modified seeds, which came onto the market about 15 or so years ago and are contaminating our food supply. We're protesting specifically the biotech company Monsanto, which is a chemical company in the Midwest. They're the main producer of genetically modified organisms, and we want to let them know that we don't want them on the market. They are toxic for human consumption, and they're banned in a number of European countries and Japan, and we don't want them here.
I want to say thank you to the Boston Police and the folks going in the building here. I hope you guys are listening. This is for your kids and for your grandkids. That's right. And this is a little lullaby to the tune of Mr. Sandman. With any luck at all, it'll put Monsanto to sleep. Bum 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 bum. Monsanto, quit being so mean. You're scaring farmers from building their dreams. You drench our soils with your poisonous streams. Then tell us that organic foods are over. Monsanto, we're so afraid. The food we're eating's putting us in our graves. You've killed off all of the bees. Sue the farmers for corporate greed. Bum 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 bum. Monsanto, you make GMOs, glyphosate, herbicide, bacillus toxins. Give back our spinach, kale and broccoli, corn and collards with no modification. So all you farmers and friends, we'll stand together and fight to the end. Please remove your dirty seeds. Oh, Monsanto, leave us. Please, please leave us. Monsanto, leave us our dreams. Thank you. And we'll thank you when you stop making those things.
Hi, tell us who you are and why you're out here and standing in front of Monsanto's gate in Cunha.
Hi Doug, I'm Courtney from Maui. I coordinate for GMO-free Maui, GMO-free Oahu. I came out here for the hearing this past week to get our Honolulu Council to support the labeling that all the 3 counties want for 2 years in a row now, and they blocked it. So we're out here today to tell the world that Monsanto is poisoning Hawaii. They're poisoning our food supply, our water, our land, our air, and we want them to stop. We want them to leave now.
So you're telling me that the Maui County Council passed a measure that would ask the state legislature to make the labeling of GMOs mandatory.
With unanimous support.
Unanimous support. And the other 2 neighbor island counties did the same, Kauai and the island of Hawaii. So it came to Honolulu, and then what happened there?
Well, you've got the same council members, some of the same council members from last year blocking it because they received donations from Monsanto. And you can visit the GMO-free Oahu group on Facebook and Babes Against Biotech and check this out. So you have Nestor Garcia, the chair of the council, Ernie Martin, Stanley Chang, who's just received a little bit of money, but he must be getting favors because he's the one that actually drew up the resolution and took it out of the HSAC package. Ikaika Anderson and the new guy. Joey, he's returned, Joey Monahan.
Yeah, that's right.
So they were after 3 or 4 hours of public testimony, all in support of labeling, and a stack of testimony that was sent in this thick, not one piece of opposition. These guys were eager to raise their hands and oppose the CD1 that Councilmember Tom Berg was recommending so that they could put this back in. You know, they slipped it out. Stanley Chang slipped it out. The agenda came out the night before Thanksgiving. You know, it totally ruined my holiday. I couldn't believe it. You know, I worked on it ever since then, trying to find out what was going on. So Stanley took out the PLDC resolution and the GMO labeling resolution. They didn't even want to hear it. They just want to pretend they didn't even exist.
Right. Okay, well, there's one more chance, right? And that's December 5th, 10 a.m., Honolulu Hale. If we can get enough people out, who knows?
Yes, we're asking that people come, they bring their families. There's going to be actually Tom is going to give out a few certificates to recognize people that have been educating in this movement. Myself, Walter Biddy, Melissa Lee, Maruyama. And that's going to be in the morning, and I think the actual hearing, we should double check, but I think it starts at 1. That's
okay. I saw a 10 a.m. date, but we'll double check, and that's December 5th. Honolulu Hale, downtown Honolulu.
So the idea is to get as much publicity for this and give them one more chance to show their colors.
Right.
And hope that somehow they will vote in support of Tom's floor job to put this back in.
Great. Thank you much, Courtney.
Thank you.
Nice seeing you always.
You too.
Okay.
I'm here today to ask the Gates Foundation to sever all their ties with Monsanto. Currently, they're opening up markets throughout Africa for corporations like Monsanto, Syngenta, Bayer, Dow, all the major agribusinesses that have destroyed our food system here in this country. The Gates Foundation is looking to export our model, our broken model, to Africa, and hundreds of thousands of farmers are trying to organize against these giants, but they don't have the resources to get their voices heard. So we're here today to reflect their voices and make them heard.
I don't want to find out that when I'm 40 or 50 I'm going to have health effects that I can blame Monsanto for.
As a medical physician and practitioner, I'm really concerned about the new Dow Monsanto conglomeration of 2,4-D, which is half the exfoliant of Agent Orange. It's about to be approved if the 2,4-D experimental corn becomes available, it will spill into the surrounding lands, into the watershed. It will affect all fish.
We have more than enough proof that Monsanto seeds aren't working here in the U.S. Failures with weed resistance, pesticide resistance, and one of the major issues that we have with the seeds being introduced into Africa is intellectual property rights. African farmers can't afford these seeds, and the Gates Foundation is helping them to afford these seeds by opening up microcredit organizations, which puts farmers into a debt cycle that ultimately leads to them losing their land and having to move into the city.
So we got to keep working together as GMO Free Washington, as the Fair Trade Coalition, as Community Alliance for Global Justice, and all the educators to keep putting the pressure on the Gates Foundation to be responsive to all the people. Yeah?
We'll be back! 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 Hands off Africa's food supply! Monsanto profits while people die!
Namely, in earlier times, it was easier to control 1 million people. Literally, it was easier to control 1 million people than physically to kill 1 million people. Today, it is infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people.
I write books for all boys and girls, my students who will shape their future worlds. That's the purpose I travel the earth for, international institutions I work for. Little by little we unveil the crime, revelation of the method will come in due time. Meantime, sit close to your TV while we manufacture your fake reality. I'll put my plans in a song, and as I destroy your way of life, I'll make you sing along. Psycho, 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 psychopath extraordinary. Educated well within your paradigm, but you have no clue you're a slave to maritime. Even if you think outside the bubble, I bet you've been convinced that I'm deeply troubled. Cause I said that on a CFR clip, but I hold all power with the superstar grip. Z-Big.
You and I both know Bill Clinton gave Arafat and the Palestinians everything they could have
such a stunningly superficial knowledge of what went on that it's almost embarrassing to listen to you.
Pay attention to the glamour and the glitz if you want your world to keep spinning. Don't ask ridiculous questions to my minions. We molded your every opinion. You will cheer even if your team isn't winning. Very soon we will give you implantable chip to insert in your neck like an animal. Psychological, that is just part one. Then we use real big microwave harp gun. Z-Big, rock your bell. I should be arrested, investigated, and locked in a cell with no windows and caca on the wall. Forced to drink raccoon piss through a straw. Instead, I've been instructing your president. He'll be dead if he doesn't take his medicine. I groomed him for the job in Chicago. I got more connect than the mob. Anybody with half a brain should know that. I created Al-Qaeda for their blowback. Psycho, 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 psychopath extraordinaire. It's so easy,
literally,
to murder 1 million,
to kill 1 million people.
Innocent people,
literally,
helpless children.
Today, it is infinitely easier.
I'm democratic response to Hank Kissinger. Not quite as famous, but a bit more shiftier. Helping you enjoy your paradigm fantasia. I engineered the domination of Eurasia. I must not tell lie when media ask why several million people must die. We will do whatever we deem clever to prevent the barbarians coming together. Cutting edge technology of the season. Manipulate emotion, control all reason. Z-Big Niv, not Z-Big New. That's Mr. Psycho to you. Disappear you quicker than I order pizza. You don't believe me? Ask my daughter Mika.
Americans know that Israel and the United States share common values, that we defend common interests, that we face common enemies. Iran's leaders know that too. You're the great Satan, you're the little Satan. For them, we are you, and you are us. And you know something, Mr. President? At least on this last point, I think they're right. You're the great Satan, we're the little Satan.
Smash your teeth in, whore. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm out of control.